Hey, I made 2 videos in the same month. Last time I had that happen was back in March. Oh god. But yes, I am finally trying to make these more consistently from now on, so let's start. This is Meet the Weapons, a series where I talk about weapons in Team Fortress 2. Specifically about how they've been changed over the years, the numbers and statistics behind them, and their overall viability and uses in-game. The weapon we're going to talk about today is the Phlogistinator for the Pyro. A good size of Pyro's arsenal are crit gimmick weapons, or weapons that give mini crits or regular crit damage for using them right, and the Phlog is no exception to this. It has a very interesting reputation. Back at its launch, it was extremely hated and very unfun to fight against, and it was like that for a long time. And when the TF team finally decided to nerf it, it's now okay, I guess? Let's get into the history. In December of 2011, an update was released called the Australian Christmas Update, and in this update they added a bunch of weapons including the Phlogistinator, and it had pretty unique stats. Once you did enough fire damage and fill up a meter, if you taunt, you gain all your health back and get crits for 12 seconds with your primary. You also get a 90% damage resistance while taunting. However, its main downside was not being able to air blast, which is a pretty big part of the flamethrower's use. So let's think about that for a second. WM1, which is one of the most unfun things to fight against and takes no skill whatsoever, the only way of fighting with the actual flamethrower, and weapons that use crit gimmicks are mostly disliked, or at least with me, with the exception of a few, and so the TF team basically put those two things together and decided, yep, that's a good weapon. It also had no random crits, but who cares about that? During this time, this was very unfun to fight against, since 12 seconds is a lot of time to have crits, so in a patch on March 15, 2012, it finally got a nerf. Direct damage was reduced by 10%, and the crit duration was lowered from 12 seconds to 10 seconds. Then, on June 27th of the same year, the Pyromania update was released. The base damage was increased by 10%. Keep in mind, direct damage and base damage are two different things, so don't think they reverted that change yet. And the damage resistance while taunting was reduced to 75%. Now, many people during this time still hated fighting against it. People still thought it was overpowered, and so 3 years later on the Tough Break update, the TF team decided the right thing to do was to make it even more overpowered. What? The 10% damage penalty was removed, and now when taunting, you are now completely invulnerable instead of having a resistance, and are completely immune to knockback. Now I have an idea why they did this. This is also the same update where the Pyro gained health back when extinguishing teammates, and since the Phlog could not extinguish teammates and thus not get that bonus from extinguishing them, they compensated the Phlog by buffing it. I mean, it was a terrible decision, but at least it would make sense. And then it took an entire month to nerf it after that, so on January 20th, 2016, the Phlog can no longer restore health on taunting, and also increase the amount of damage to fill the MF meter from 225 damage to 300 damage. Since then, it hasn't had any unique changes since then, only changes that were to all flamethrowers. Aim at your match, direct fire damage decreases healing rate and shield effects by 25%, and with Jungle Inferno, the afterburn duration of flamethrowers is now based on how long the target is in contact with direct flames. That's all for the major balance changes, so let's get into the statistics. The Phlog and all other flamethrowers are particle-based weapons with a small range. Every time you press mouse 1, particles appear for a short time, and that's the blue cube that you see right now. Their damage is determined by the duration of their lifetime. Each particle does more damage the younger it is. So the closer you are to a target, each particle does more damage since it takes less time for the particle to travel to the target, and vice versa. With base damage at the farthest range, each particle does 6.5 damage. With mini crits it does 9 damage, and with critical hits it does 20 damage. At point blank range, each particle does 13 damage. With mini crits, each particle does 18 damage, and with critical hits, each particle does 39 damage. Now that doesn't seem like a lot of damage at first glance, until you remember that's just a single particle. Every attack interval, the flamethrower spawns one particle. And what's the attack interval? 0.044 seconds. And so by doing some math, we can figure out the flamethrower spawns roughly 23 particles a second. So if we do some calculations, we can figure out some estimates for the damage per second. With base damage at the farthest range, the Phlog can do 90 damage per second. With mini crits, it can be 120 damage per second, and with critical damage, the Phlog does 270 damage per second. Remember, this is the farthest range. This is the minimum the flamethrower does in 1 second. With base damage at point blank range, the Phlog does 170 damage per second. With mini crits, it's 220 damage per second, and with critical damage, the Phlog does 510 damage per second. However, these are just estimates, so they might not be 100% accurate. Now we go into the more unimportant stats of it. The Phlog holds 200 ammo and consumes 1 ammo for every 0.08 seconds. And finally, we must talk about Afterburn. It has changed dramatically since the last time we've talked about it. The duration of afterburn now depends on how long the target was in direct flames. The minimum time of afterburn is 3 seconds and the maximum time is 10 seconds. And the afterburn does more damage now. Afterburn now does 4 damage per tick instead of 3 per tick, meaning now it can do 8 damage per second. And with midi-crits it's 5 damage per tick and 10 per second. So that means with minimum time and base damage, Afterburn can only do 24 damage, and with midi-crits it can only do 30. With the maximum time, however, it's much more devastating. With base damage Afterburn, it can now do a total of 80 damage, and with midi-crits, the total will increase to 100. Those are all the statistics for the Phlog, so is it any good? The Phlog on its own kind of sucks. Not having Air Blast is an extremely big downside. It's really your only way of defending yourself against projectiles, and in trade you get crits for doing fire damage. It can actually be very rewarding when using crits and does require good health management and positioning to use it effectively. It's much more effective while flanking than running at them head first. However, when not using crits, it's just a straight downgrade, forcing you to only M1, which not many people like fighting against. The only thing you can really do with the Phlogistinator is just run at people while holding mouse 1 and don't be stupid. Now, a secondary is almost as important as the primary for a pyro, but I can't really recommend a good secondary to use with this since none of them pair very well with it compared to any of the other flamethrowers. It could be used with a man melter as intended. It gives the ability to extinguish teammates for crits. It's an okay choice, but for other secondaries, it's kinda mixed. The jetpack is fine and really good for mobility, but then only being able to do damage through the Phlog and melee would not be the best choice, especially without the air blast. The flare gun's okay, I guess. It's better on other flamethrowers, but it's not terrible, not exactly great either. If you use the scorch shot, I don't like you. Even before the reserve shooter nerf, it was basically pointless to use with the Phlog, and now it's just pointless with every flamethrower. The panic attack, as much as it breaks my heart to say, it just sucks in every scenario now. The stock shotgun's fine with every flamethrower, so it's fine here. The detonator, I think, is one of the best secondaries to use with the Phlog. It allows some new mobility options, but it's also a ranged flare gun that uses fire damage. It's pretty good. But most of the time, secondaries are just better with different flamethrowers. The Phlog on its own is just so boring to use. It has some of the blandest stats, and without the air blast, there's really a good reason to use this instead of any other flamethrower. I don't like it at all. It sucks. That's it. It just sucks. Honestly, I'm more disappointed in the Phlog than angry. You take a futuristic laser flamethrower and just give it a crit gimmick. As if the pirate didn't have enough of those yet. They could have done so much more. Shame. Anyway, thank you for watching one of these poor quality videos, and in the next video, I'll be doing something slightly different. Next time, I will be going over not 1, not 2, but 4 weapons. Don't get your hopes up. Many weapons, mostly melees, are either too bland or not worth making an entire video of solo, so next time I'm gonna go over the Market Garden, the Disciplinary Action, Half Zatoichi, and the Pain Train. Hey look, those are all for Soldier. What a coincidence.